Little also signed a bill that would allow parents or guardians to sue a library for $250 plus damages if that library fails to move what they believe is obscene content within 60 days of written request. Little had vetoed a different library bill last year and had reservations about this one, telling associate producer Logan Finney on Wednesday that he, quote, signed that stinkin' library bill, unquote. On Wednesday afternoon, Logan sat down with Representatives Brent Crane and Ned Burns to discuss some of what the legislators passed and what they strategically did not hear this session.
Thank you both so much for joining us this week. Congratulations on adjourning sine die. Representative Crane, starting with you, what were some of your high points from this session?
Interestingly enough, from my perspective, House Bill 521, which was some tax relief to Idahoans, as well as dealing with some of the backlog of personal maintenance issues at school districts, we were able to solve some of that with House Bill 521. I know you might think this is funny for me to throw in here, but liquor license reform for resort cities. It's a 15-year-old issue that we have been working on for a number of years, and we were finally able to get that passed and signed into law so that resort cities can now get additional liquor licenses for those resort cities who see a decline in population. So those were a couple of things. We had another, probably the most interesting bill that I saw this year had to do with deep fakes and AI, and there was a lot of iterations of that bill, but we finally got that signed into law as well. It's something that I think that your viewers will be interested as the legislative process continues to unfold in campaigns, seeing how deep fakes affect the political process.
Yeah, and deep fakes, for anyone who's not familiar, those are video representations of people that look like a real person saying a real thing, but it's been altered or generated in some way.
Yep, absolutely.
Representative Burns, what about for you? What were some of your highlights this year?
You know, I was a big fan of sort of the original iteration of 521, which was like the sort of the clean, just school facilities funding. Understanding that there were some other things that needed to happen politically to get it done, I was still pretty pleased with it. It worked out. You know, my districts are very well represented by it. I was very pleased that we passed the appropriation for Idaho launch. Thrilled to be able to get that done. You know, to kind of follow through on our promise to graduating seniors this year. Hopefully we'll be able to continue that in years future. And I think my biggest session highlight is what didn't happen, and that would have been a voucher bill.
A voucher, that meaning the state subsidizing private school?
Correct.
What about negatives, things that did make it across the line that you wish hadn't?
Well, I know we're going to talk about it soon, but you know, I was hopeful that I was a big fan of the Senate version of the library bill. Sadly, that broke down on the Senate floor. It was, I felt like a cleaner version of how to deal with issues that some folks might find objectionable in libraries. Understanding that that didn't work, then we ended up with 710. Not as big a fan of that.
Representative Crane, what about you? Is there something you wish had happened this session that didn't make it across the line?
Yeah, I kind of wish we would have tied a bow on and put a bow on the issue of the University of Idaho purchasing the University of Phoenix. Obviously, we got that through the House, and then it didn't have enough support in the Senate, even though when they tried to bring some additional legislation, they couldn't get support for that as well. But I think providing some certainty around that issue, that's a large bill for taxpayers to undertake if we're going to guarantee that loan on the purchase of the University of Phoenix. So I kind of would have liked to have seen that resolved, but that's probably about it.
Do you think that deal is likely to move forward without a formal thumbs up or thumbs down from the legislature?
I think it gave the University of Idaho cause for pause, and definitely the state board when they realized where the legislature is at and the concerns that the legislature has regarding that. I think that they're going to move slowly. I don't know if they'll continue to move forward or not, though.
All right, well, let's transition to that library bill, House Bill 710. Your committee, State Affairs, has been working on this issue for a long time, and can you talk to me about what it took to get that bill across the finish line?
Yeah, first of all, it started in I believe it was 2022 was the first bill that we saw in that, and then we saw a bill in 2023, and then 3 bills in 2024. And right on, my counterpart in the Senate, Senator Guthrie, and I, when we saw different library bills coming forward, thought that quite possibly we could hold the first bill that Representative Crane, my brother, brought forward, and maybe put Senator Schroeder and Representative Crane together and get some legislation. That failed to make it out of the Senate, so then we came back with House Bill 710, and I know Representative Burns and I disagree on the issue, but I was glad to see us actually get resolution and get that issue resolved.
Representative Burns, there have been some changes from the bill that was vetoed last year to the bill that was signed into law this year. What do you make of those changes? Do you think that'll be enough to deal with some of the concerns folks have expressed?
I mean, there's still a potential civil right of action that someone has in the bill, and I've been pretty consistent throughout the last this 67th legislative session, both first and second term, about not supporting bills with private rights of action. And I know that it's only $250. That's the private right of action, but there's still damages in there which could potentially cause further harm to libraries.
Legal fees for the library.
Correct.
That sort of thing.
And also potentially a real risk of losing the ability to have insurance.
Representative Crane, do you think that libraries ought to be concerned that they are facing large legal risk, potentially big bills, whether it's through insurance or legal issues? Do you think that library districts in Idaho should be concerned about that?
No, and it's kind of interesting. A year ago, I was on your show talking about this very issue with a librarian from Meridian. And I told him, I said, look, rest assured, this was after the bill had died last year. I said, we're going to get something done. And what we came forward with, I don't think that libraries need to be concerned. One of the big distinctions in the bill this year is instead of removing books, it's actually relocating books. And I think that that got lost with the number of bills that were coming through. It's simply a relocation policy. If the book violates Idaho's obscenity statutes, then you relocate it to a section designated for adults.
And is that adults only? Is that how the bill phrased it?
I believe that's the terminology that's used in the bill. But so if they will just simply, hey, there's question, they move it to that section, there's going to be no lawsuit brought forward. So I really don't. I think it was a good compromise, and I think that that's why we finally ended up getting the bill through the House, Senate, and the governor to sign it.
One final library question for you. I believe on the House floor at one point you had stood up and said if something like this, the bill that finally passed, didn't make it through, we would go back to the original version, that 2022 bill, which would have opened librarians up to criminal liability. Was that an empty threat, a very real threat to your colleagues? No. What's your stance on what was the next step if this had been vetoed?
Yeah, it was a very real threat. At the start of the session and leading up to the session, at the start of the session, my leadership team was asking what we were planning to do with regards to the library issue. And they said, you need to know, Representative, the Senate is already starting from the standpoint of maybe we ought to go back to House Bill 666, which would remove the exemption for librarians and put them in a position that they could be fined or put in jail. So that was not an empty threat, that was a real threat, that if this bill didn't pass, that is what was going to come forward next.
Representative Burns, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I take Representative Crane at his word that that's where some senators that was their sort of bargaining point. I think that you might have had a harder time getting that through committee, or through the Senate. I don't know that there would have potentially been 18 folks to get there. Regardless, I know that it's probably going to be 710, 666, 384, any of the library bills that we had to deal with. It's going to create a tremendous burden on the libraries, and I do think that this is likely to result in some litigation. Even 710, although it's probably not as far as some representatives wanted or senators wanted. It's further than a lot of my caucus wanted. I would imagine that we're going to see some litigation out of it.
One other issue that has been discussed at length this session but not legislated on is the topic of abortion as well as in vitro fertilization. Representative Crane, you're the chairman of State Affairs Committee where those sort of bills go through. What was your reasoning for not taking up any abortion bills this year?
We decided very early on that since the state of Idaho has a lawsuit before the U.S. Supreme Court that we were not going to do anything with trying to make changes to Idaho's abortion statutes. We were going to let the U.S. Supreme Court make their decision, and then we would move from that position. With regards to in vitro fertilization, I never saw a draft, and an RS never came to me and was shopped with me as to what we need to do. And so we will continue to stay engaged on that front. I think in vitro fertilization is an important thing that families need to know, and those that are practicing in that field, that in vitro fertilization should not be at risk and they don't need to be concerned about having the ability to use in vitro fertilization to have a family.
Representative Burns, when it comes to reassurances from Republicans that IVF is not at risk, does that put your mind at ease?
Not really.
Why not?
Not really. No, because as we've seen in other states, this is in my mind sort of a chip away, And there's unintended consequences to doing a bill this year that kind of sets up the stage for something more drastic in following legislative sessions. And as much as I take my good friend Representative Crane at his word right now, I'm concerned about what future legislative bodies may do. And so until we codify IVF protections into code, I don't have that assurance that this issue is laid to rest.
Looking forward to the future, taking that the Supreme Court off the table,
Yep.
What do the current negotiations on a possible future abortion bill look like?
It ranges. It's a broad spectrum, candidly. Of you've got some individuals that want to obviously totally repeal Idaho's abortion statutes. And in talking with doctors, pro-choice doctors, I've let them know elective abortion is not going to happen in the state of Idaho. So that you're going to have to set that aside. And for those that are on the pro-life side of the issue, they're having to wrestle in a post-Roe world. Are there instances or examples that they're okay with allowing those families to make the decision? Rape, incest, life of the mother, there's other issues that people are talking about. So I'm confident that we're going to have an interesting conversation with regards to that. For my colleague on in vitro fertilization, I didn't talk to a single person in the legislature this year that's against in vitro fertilization. Where the sticking point is going to be on that issue, and the legislature's not, in my opinion, they're not prepared to deal with that, is what do you do with the frozen embryos? That's kind of where, as I began to talk to different members, and I said, you feel like in vitro fertilization is okay? Oh yeah, absolutely. It was the what do we do with the frozen embryos, those that aren't used? And so I think that as you watch this issue, that is probably more where the policy conversation's that's where the negotiation, the policy crafting that is going to be, it can get caught up, I think.
Okay, well, we will certainly have an eye on that issue as it moves forward. Representative Brent Crane, Representative Ned Burns, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.